What is unique about Indian philosophy or Vedic philosophy? The philosophy surrounding the Vedas that has originated from India, or what Hindus would call Bharat. What is unique about it? What is special about it? Well, first of all, is there something unique about it, and is there something special about it? The only way, or one of the only ways I would say, is to look at the texts that are surrounding the Vedas. That is, the texts that are represented by the 6 schools of Indian philosophy: Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. Each of these schools of thought have texts related to them. Sankhya will have the Sankhya Karika, Yoga will have the Yoga Sutra, right? Mimamsa will have the Mimamsa Sutra, Vedanta will have the Vedanta Sutra, and many other texts, each respectively belonging to their school of thought. Now, when we look at these texts, we see in the beginning verses what the authors set out to do. So, for instance, in the Yoga Sutra, you will see the first sutra being Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Now the teachings of yoga will commence, right? Then, for example, in the Vedanta Sutra, we have Athato Brahma Jignasa. Now the inquiry into Brahman, right? Into ultimate reality occurs. So we notice that in the beginning of these texts, right, of these different schools of thought, they delineate and prescribe in some way what is going to happen and what these texts are going to talk about. But there's something that is so important, and I would say phenomenally unique about Indian philosophy and these texts when they philosophize, when they talk about the different concepts of the world. And that is, Indian philosophy sets out to conquer the problem of suffering, that is, of human suffering. In most of these Indian philosophical texts, you will see that there are verses that specifically talk about how to achieve a happy state of mind, a happy life, and how to avoid unnecessary pain. Whether it's through how one identifies with their body and mind or the soul, whether it's the types of foods that we eat, whether it's the types of things that we do and we expose our 5 senses to, whatever it is, these schools of philosophy, through their texts, delineate and explain the way to overcome human suffering. Now, why is this important? There tends to be a conception of Hinduism or the teachings in Hinduism where people will first think that, oh, what gods do you believe in? And what books, or what is your main book? And, all these different types of questions that are asked, which I frankly think they're ridiculous questions. Why does there have to be a main book? There can be many books, right? And so there's this conception of Hinduism or Hindu thought that there is a heavy reliance on God. There's a heavy reliance on this principle of God, this concept of God, whether it's an impersonal or personal God, which there is. There is a very heavy reliance on God. However, there is also literature and there's also sutras and texts that are independent of God, which means that these texts are related to how that human being needs to put his effort and his energy into striving for achieving certain types of goals. So there is an emphasis on God, but there's also an emphasis on the individual human being and what he needs to do. Why is this important? Because there is a powerful emphasis on human psychology in these texts. What does that mean? What does it mean when I say human psychology? Well, understanding the mind, the identity, what a human being needs to do in order to avoid suffering and to live a healthy, peaceful life. These are all important concepts and topics that are mentioned in these texts. It's not just, oh, pray to God and God will do this for you. Of course, there are texts like that and there's verses like that. But it's very important to understand that with Indian philosophy or Vedic philosophy, there is an emphasis on human psychology. There's an emphasis on how the mind will be if we act in certain ways. How the mind will be if we take certain actions that are right or wrong, not morally, but right or wrong, which are conducive to our health or not conducive to our health. And so this is important because then this creates a bridge between what these ancient texts are saying from human psychology and what modern psychology is saying. And if you can study modern psychology and you can also study Vedic psychology or Vedic philosophy, you can see, right, through your own experience and through our own studies, right, how these two are related and how the mind and the quality of life of the individual can be improved. Now, let me give you an example. In Indian philosophy, there's this very powerful, common conception, very powerful and common conception that all problems of the world, all crimes of the world, all horrible acts of the world, whether it's murder, whether it's rape, whether it's stealing, whatever it is, all of these problems of the world originate from the individual's inability to control his or her senses. The individual is unable to control the sense excitement out of the 5 senses that are occurring in the body, are unable to keep it at a certain level, and that makes a person greedy in a certain way and goes on to commit crime and problems. Now, this isn't about fault, this isn't about whose fault it is and morality and whatnot. Looking at the human body objectively, knowing that the body has senses, the body has organs, the body has all these things, right? Indian philosophy will explain that when you start to change yourself inwardly, when you start to introspect, eat properly, meditate, live a certain quality of life, then the senses and the desires and the passions will be under control. And when they're under control, where is there any room for crime or violence? Where is there any room for problems, stealing, hoarding, creating starvation in other countries because we just want more and more and more? When the individual is developed, when the individual has his senses under control, where is there any room for any sort of crime in the world then? So this is, for example, how a conception of how working on the individual self, coming from many of these texts in Vedic philosophy, and how it can be applied today in modern psychology. By studying the types of foods we eat, by studying the effects of meditation, by studying the effects of prayer, by waking up at certain times, studying in particular ways, introspection, studying the effects of practitioners that are prescribed in these ancient texts, we can bridge a way to have a better world and a better quality of life. And so, what I would say is very unique and special about these texts is not only does it have a component of devotion and bhakti towards God, but it has a very powerful component of psychology, of assessing people's mental states and understanding how people can live a better quality of life through controlling their individual senses. And this is something that needs to be brought out from these texts and needs to be understood by the world about what Indian philosophy, or you call it Hindu philosophy or Vedic philosophy, can offer. So, therefore, I feel that we should be exploring and applying our disciplines more to these different types of texts. Whether you study psychology, sociology, anthropology, literature, whatever text you study, try to study these texts not as a museum piece. Study them, go into the content. See, they're talking about this one particular thing of the mind. They're saying, okay, the human being acts on desire and aversion, raga dvesha. The human being goes out and does these things. Is this true? Well, what are my experiences? What have I done all day? Well, I went to the restaurant, then I went out and I drank with my friends, and then I went and I watched a movie. Well, I had a desire to eat. I had a desire for entertainment. I had a desire for alcohol, etc. Whatever it is, right? Whatever desires you have, they lead you where you go. So then you think to yourself, I am actually run by my desires. And where did I not go? Well, I didn't go to my friend's house that I probably had a fight with, or I didn't go to, my ex-girlfriend's home, or whatever it is, right? These are my aversions. I want to stay away from these things. So you start to think, the human being may in fact work on desire and aversion. So you start to analyze these things. And you start to see if these things are true or not for you, and then you start to observe it. So these texts are not museum pieces. They're valuable, priceless gems where you can extract psychology from. So thank you, and we will discuss another topic next time.